Right, we're working our way up the west coast of Africa. It's the Ultimate World Cruise, Sunday, June 2nd, 2024. And this is the welcome the Angolans in Luanda gave us as we left the ship. So this country is a difficult place. Our tour guide summed it up easily by saying that the people in Angola aren't living, they're surviving. Our first stop was this place called Moon Beach, which was an hour south of the capital of Luanda. And I really have no idea why they really took us here. It was supposed to be the view of these canyons that were formed by rain erosion, but it really was nothing spectacular. You can see the beach out there, and there's plenty of places in southern Utah that look like this. It wasn't that spectacular. But Angola has been free of civil war since 2002. The civil war lasted from 1975, when they gained independence from the Portuguese, until 2002. And they are finally a multi-party democracy after the 1992 election. So they are no longer communist, but there's still a presence of Cuba here. There's still a lot of corruption in the government, and it's not a country that's doing very well. Anyway, this is Moon Beach, and after Moon Beach, we headed back north towards Luanda, and we're going to be stopping at the Slave Museum, which was probably the most interesting thing we did. There's a museum there on the history of the Atlantic slave trade, of which Angola was a big part. Over the period of 366 years that they were exporting slaves from Africa, Luanda and Angola exported 5.7 million of the 12.5 million slaves. Now, the most interesting thing I saw here were these baobab trees, and I looked on both sides for them. Finally, I found them on this side of the van. These baobab trees have huge trunks and then kind of a short, stumpy top. And some of those trunks can be, 10 or 15 feet thick. So there's another good picture of baobab trees at the Slavery Museum. And this is a typical village that we passed on the way. You can see the only paved road is the one that we're riding on, which is the main kind of north. At the main north-south road. So it's a Sunday, and because of the Portuguese influence, you're going to see most of the people are at the Catholic Church that's coming up. So Angola speaks Portuguese, along with Portugal, Brazil, and Angola. Those are the three major Portuguese-speaking countries in the world. There's the church, there's all the people. Now, there's a big baobab tree right there at the foot of the stairs going up to the Slave Museum. So, slavery is repugnant in any form. Human trafficking is horrible. It went on here for 366 years. An average of 34,000 slaves were shipped from the shores of Africa to mostly Brazil from 1501 to 1866. And they shipped them in loads of about 400. So that's about 85 ships on average a year. Much lower number at the start and the end, but that is a lot of slave ships every year for 366 years. So slavery finally ended in 1850 when Brazil closed its ports to slave ships. And in 1856, those born to slaves were considered free. Finally, in 1869, all of them were freed. So around the world in the 1860s, there was a movement to end slavery. Like Russia ended slavery and its serfdom in 1861. USA, of course, in 1865 with the Civil War, an Emancipation Proclamation. Finally, in 1869, all the slaves were freed, but they were 12,531,000 slaves shipped off the coast of Africa during the Atlantic slave trade years. It's a horrible thing. But I suppose, in retrospect, those that ended up in other locations like Brazil and the United States, at least their ancestors were blessed to be in a better place, because Africa is still a very difficult location. So there's the 5.7 million from Angola, and there's the number on the, this is a chart from the museum, 12.521 million total slaves were shipped. And here's a table that shows who shipped them and where they went to. And notice they were shipped to the U.S. from 1619 to 1640, and then from 1670 to 1807. And only about 400,000 of the 12 million slaves were shipped to the U.S. Well, I want to dwell on this slide for a minute. This is a map of the area around Angola where the slaves were, quote unquote, harvested from. And they were harvested by the black tribes that were conquering the neighboring tribes after they got guns and ammunition from the Portuguese. And they subsequently brought the slaves in to the shipment locations and sold them to the Portuguese. And then the Portuguese and the English and Brazilians and everybody else shipped them offshore to their various locations. But I mean, this is a point that I don't think is clear to everybody, how the local tribes were responsible for conquering their neighbors and selling them to the folks who were trafficking in slaves. It's an awful thing. And I think now they're just maybe coming to terms with the fact that there was so much involvement by the local tribes in the slave trade. It's not just the Portuguese and the English and Brazilians who were involved. Anyway, we're going to be stopping at some other slave trade ports on our trip north through Africa, and I'll try and fact check this information that we got here. So this is a monument to the first president of Angola, and it's also his mausoleum. And our last stop was a stop at this fort that overlooks Luanda and the port, and I think that this fort is now a museum, a military museum, and it, I believe, was built by the Portuguese, but it's really got a commanding view of the port, so I'm sure it could protect it from any ships coming in offshore. So we just walked around the top and got kind of the panoramic view of Luanda from the top of the fort. But Angola, I have to admit, is not a place that is on my must-return list. As the conditions are there very harsh. I mean, the unemployment, depending on which travel guide you talk to, is anywhere from 90% to 40%, but still very high unemployment and a lot of crime. They told us it was the highest cost expat location in the world for putting expats who are working in the oil business and the diamond business. So I imagine it's due to security costs. And you can actually see with the naked eye, you can see Serenaded Seas out there in the distance in the port, which is off kind of to your right there. We had to be back to the ship by, I think it was 4:30 today. And we got back in plenty of time. Got back on board, and there were some folks that had some shore excursions that were a little bit unnerving. So lots of stories going around on the ship afterwards. But anyway, that's Angola, and I'll try and, as I mentioned, fact check some of the slave information I got at the other ports that we're going to be stopping at shortly.